Chosen one, stop scrolling. This message is not for everyone, and that's exactly why it found you. If someone walked away from you, replaced you, or chose something fake over something real, listen closely. What they did wasn't a win. It was a test, and they failed it. You didn't lose your value. You didn't get left behind. You were removed because your presence demanded truth, depth, and growth they couldn't fake. They thought they were upgrading. They thought they found something easier, lighter, more exciting. But what they really chose was illusion. And illusion never lasts. Right now, while you're healing and leveling up in silence, they're beginning to feel it. The absence, the weight, the realization that what they replaced you with cannot hold what you carried. And here's the part. Few people are meant to hear. Only some chosen ones were meant to go through this separation. Only some people needed to be removed so your next chapter could open. If this resonates, don't explain it. Comment "chosen" below. Not everyone should understand this message, but if you do, you already know. It was meant for you. Stay with me. When they walked away from you, it was never because you lacked value. It was because your value exposed parts of them they were not ready to confront. You were not difficult. You were not asking for too much. You were not too intense. You were real. And real presence has weight. It requires truth. It demands growth. It asks people to rise to a level they cannot fake their way through. That kind of depth is uncomfortable for someone who survives by avoiding responsibility and emotional honesty. The person they chose, instead of you, felt easier. That connection looked lighter, simpler, more exciting on the surface. There were fewer questions, less accountability, no expectations to grow or evolve. That person knew how to perform. They knew how to mirror emotions without carrying them. They knew how to say the right words at the right moments without meaning any of it. What they didn't know was how to stand firm when things got hard. They didn't know how to stay loyal under pressure. They didn't know how to remain consistent when the excitement faded. They didn't know how to grow through discomfort instead of running from it. You, on the other hand, required maturity. You required honesty even when the truth was inconvenient. You required accountability instead of excuses. You required them to face the parts of themselves they kept hidden. And instead of rising to meet you, they retreated. They chose what felt comfortable over what was meaningful. They chose attention over connection. They chose illusion over substance. At first, it felt like relief to them. No emotional weight, no deep conversations, no need to show up fully. They confused the absence of pressure with peace. They confused temporary validation with love. But illusion never lasts. The moment real life applied pressure, the cracks began to show. The excitement couldn't sustain the connection. The performance couldn't replace authenticity. The fake couldn't hold weight when responsibility appeared. Suddenly, stability was missing. Depth was gone. Trust felt fragile. That's when your presence began to resurface in their mind. Not as nostalgia, not as fantasy, but as comparison. They remembered how grounded you were, how consistent you stayed, how real the connection felt when it mattered. And in those quiet moments, when distractions failed and silence took over, they couldn't escape the truth. They had traded something real for something temporary. That realization is where regret begins. Not all regret announces itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in sleepless nights, in second-guessing, in the hollow feeling that something valuable was lost and cannot be replaced. They chose illusion, and now they live with the cost of that choice. You didn't beg for clarity. You didn't chase for reassurance. You didn't lower yourself, trying to be chosen. And that is the part they never expected. They anticipated emotion. They expected confrontation. They assumed you would fight, argue, explain, or demand answers. In their mind, your value was measured by how hard you would try to keep them. But instead, you walked away with your dignity intact. That silence was not confusion. It was not indifference. It was self-respect. At the time, they misread it. They told themselves you didn't care. They assumed you moved on easily. They believed your quiet exit meant they made the right decision. They were wrong. Your silence became a mirror they couldn't avoid. Without your reactions, they lost the ability to rewrite the story. Without your messages, they lost control over how the ending felt. Without your explanations, they were left alone with their choice. Silence removes distraction. When you stopped responding, there was nothing left to blame. When you stopped reaching out, there was no emotional noise to hide behind. When you stopped trying to prove your worth, they were forced to confront a reality they had avoided. You never needed validation from them to know who you were. That realization is unsettling. Silence creates space, and space amplifies truth. In that space, they replay conversations they once dismissed. They remember moments where your consistency went unnoticed. They begin to understand how rare it is to encounter someone who shows up without manipulation, without games, without conditions. Your absence speaks louder than any argument ever could. They start questioning themselves. They wonder why things feel empty now. They compare connections without meaning to the depth they once had and took for granted. That is where the discomfort begins, because silence doesn't attack. It reveals. It shows them what they lost without you having to say a word. It exposes the weight of their decision without drama or confrontation. And that quiet clarity becomes heavier than any emotional outburst ever could have been. By the time they fully understand what your silence meant, the window has already closed. You are no longer emotionally available. You are no longer accessible in the same way. You have moved forward internally. That shift is painful for them because it cannot be undone. Rejection wounds the ego. Silence dismantles illusions. They may never admit it. They may never reach out. But the truth remains. The moment you chose dignity over explanation was the moment the balance shifted. Your silence didn't push them away. It forced them to finally see you. And by the time they did, it was already too late. Many people believe they can replace someone simply by filling the space they left behind. They think presence can be swapped, roles can be reassigned, and connections can be duplicated. They are wrong. What you brought into their life was not just companionship. It was energy, and energy cannot be copied. Your presence carried authenticity. You were real in a way that didn't require performance. You showed up as yourself, without masks, without manipulation, without pretending to be something you weren't. That kind of energy creates grounding. It creates stability. It creates a sense of safety that most people don't realize is rare until it disappears. The person they chose after you could replicate behavior, but not intention. They could say the same words, but the meaning behind them was hollow. They could imitate affection, but loyalty was conditional. They could appear attentive for a moment, but consistency was never guaranteed. At first, it seemed enough. Newness often disguises emptiness. Attention can feel like connection when there is nothing to compare it to. But time reveals what surface-level effort cannot sustain. Gradually, the mask began to slip. Conversations started to feel repetitive and shallow. Emotional depth was missing. The connection lacked grounding. When challenges arose, the stability you once provided was nowhere to be found. That is when comparison began. Quietly and unintentionally, they started noticing what was absent rather than what was present. They felt the instability they never had with you. They recognized the emotional inconsistency they once overlooked because excitement distracted them. And in those moments, your memory became a mirror, not a memory of you begging to be chosen, not a memory of you pleading for attention, a memory of you standing firm, self-respecting, and real. They remembered how you stayed consistent when things were uncomfortable, how you showed up without conditions, how your energy brought calm instead of chaos. That comparison is brutal because it doesn't flatter the ego. It forces an uncomfortable truth into focus. What they chose cannot replace what they lost. No matter how hard someone tries to recreate authenticity, it cannot be manufactured. Real energy has presence. It has weight. It holds space without effort. They thought they could upgrade by choosing what looked easier. Instead, they downgraded. And that realization doesn't fade. It lingers quietly, surfacing in moments when distraction fails and honesty becomes unavoidable. You were not replaced. You were revealed through absence, through contrast, and through the truth that what is real can never be substituted. That is the cost of choosing something fake over something genuine. Regret rarely arrives with dramatic apologies or public admissions. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. Instead, it settles in quietly, weaving itself into everyday moments until it becomes impossible to ignore. Sometimes regret shows up as restlessness, the inability to feel settled no matter where they are. Sometimes it appears as sleepless nights, when distractions fade and the mind has nowhere to run. Sometimes it surfaces as sudden mood shifts or unexplained anxiety that has no clear external cause. From the outside, they may look fine. They may even appear happier than before. They might convince others and themselves that they made the right choice. But beneath the surface, something feels wrong. There's a constant sense that something valuable is missing, and they know exactly what it is. They betrayed someone genuine for something temporary. That realization doesn't strike all at once. It unfolds slowly, in waves. At first, it's denial. Then, it's justification. Eventually, it becomes acceptance. And that's where the pain deepens. They begin to question their own judgment. They replay moments where they dismissed what mattered. They start doubting their ability to choose wisely, not just in relationships, but in life. The confidence they once had in their decisions begins to erode. An emptiness forms that can't be filled with distraction. It isn't loneliness in the traditional sense. It's the absence of depth. It's the loss of connection that once felt grounding and real. They try to replace it with busyness, entertainment, or new attention, but nothing quite reaches the same place. And the hardest part of regret is not the loss, it's the responsibility. They know no one forced their hand. No one manipulated them into leaving. No external circumstance demanded that choice. They chose illusion over truth. That awareness removes every excuse. There is no one to blame, no story to rewrite that makes the outcome feel justified. They are left alone with the understanding that they walked away from something rare because it required more than they were willing to give. Regret becomes merciless because it offers no escape. It doesn't need reminders. It doesn't fade with time. It resurfaces unexpectedly, during quiet moments, during milestones, during conversations that feel hollow compared to what once existed. It doesn't ask for forgiveness. It doesn't seek closure. It simply exists as a consequence. And while they live with that weight, you continue forward, untethered from the decision they regret and free from the illusion they chose. Regret is the cost of abandoning what was real. And once it settles in, it never truly leaves. This is the most important truth of all. What they did not block your path. It cleared it. Their betrayal did not slow your progress. It accelerated it. It removed what could not walk with you into your next chapter. What felt like loss was actually release. You were never meant to shrink yourself so someone else could feel comfortable. You were never meant to silence your truth to maintain connection. You were never meant to remain in a place where your consistency was overlooked and your depth went unrecognized. And you were never meant to compete with something fake. Real value does not compete. It stands. Their exit created space. Space you didn't realize you needed until it appeared. Space for clarity, where confusion once lived. Space for growth, where stagnation held you back. Space for alignment, where compromise had been draining you. What entered that space wasn't chaos, it was peace. While they remain stuck replaying the past, analyzing conversations, and questioning decisions they can't undo, you are moving forward without emotional weight, pulling you backward. While they wrestle with regret, you are building a future that does not require explanation, justification, or emotional defense. A future rooted in self-trust rather than uncertainty. This is the shift they never expected. You don't need revenge to feel whole. You don't need closure from someone who couldn't meet you with honesty. You don't need validation from anyone who failed to see your worth in real time. Your peace is not passive. It is earned. It comes from choosing self-respect over attachment, from choosing alignment over familiarity, from choosing growth over comfort. They live with regret because regret follows unresolved choices. You live with alignment because alignment follows truth. That is the real balance. Not punishment, not karma in the dramatic sense, but consequence. They sit with the weight of what they abandoned. You walk forward lighter because you no longer carry what wasn't meant for you. You didn't lose them. You found yourself. And that outcome is not accidental. It's the natural result of refusing to stay where you were unseen, undervalued, and unappreciated. Some people are lessons, some departures are blessings, and some endings exist solely to redirect you toward the life you were always meant to live. Before this message ends, understand this clearly. What happened to you was not a mistake. It was not bad luck, and it was not because you weren't enough. It happened because your presence was real in a world that survives on performance. Some people are only comfortable with surface-level connections. They want attention without responsibility, affection without consistency, and closeness without accountability. When they encountered you, someone who brought truth, depth, and stability, it forced them to confront who they were not ready to become. So they walked away. But walking away from something real always has a cost. You may not have seen it at first. You may have questioned yourself. You may have wondered if staying quieter, softer, or smaller would have changed the outcome. It wouldn't have. Because what was required from them was growth, not compromise from you. What matters now is this. You didn't stay where you were unappreciated. You chose dignity over attachment. You chose silence over chaos. You chose alignment over familiarity. And those choices quietly reshaped your future. While others remain trapped, replaying decisions they cannot undo, you are moving forward with clarity. You are building a life that does not require you to explain your worth or compete for presence. A life rooted in self-trust, peace, and stability. That is not accidental. That is earned. Some people will never apologize. Some will never admit what they lost. But acknowledgement is not required for truth to stand. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure. You don't need validation. Your growth is the outcome. Your peace is the proof. If this message resonated, let it remind you of who you are. You were never meant to be chosen by those who couldn't recognize value when it stood in front of them. You were meant to walk a path that honors your depth, your integrity, and your strength. Stay grounded, stay silent, stay aligned. And remember this: being released from the wrong hands is often the first step toward the life you were always meant to live.